heyday, it carried presidents, dignitaries, and captains of industry across America and through the heart of the Industrial Revolution. It began its life during the rise of the golden age of rail travel in America, but spent its later years in decline and neglect. Today, the story of the Sunbeam and its rebirth and restoration help tell the stories both of a bygone era and of one remarkable man, Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of a president, a diplomat, and businessman whose vision helped transform rail travel in America, and the man who made Hildene his home.
Robert was an interesting person in his own right. Obviously, his father was the president, and his father, on many levels, changed the world. Well, Robert may not have changed the world, but he played a role. His period was different than his father's period. Robert really came into his own during the Industrial Revolution, and Robert became, in the end, one of the true sort of captains of industry. People are fascinated by the next generations of Lincolns after President and Mrs. Lincoln. And what we're doing with this rail car is filling out the story of the one son who survived to adulthood, who in his own right played a real role in American history.
The Pullman Palace Car Company was founded by George Pullman in 1862. His idea was to build sleeper cars that transformed ordinary rail travel into a luxurious overnight experience. The Pullman Company's slogan was, "Travel and sleep in safety and comfort."
There was a time when Pullman Palace cars were everywhere. They traveled all over the nation by the score, the hundreds, maybe even the thousands. The fact is that now they're very, very rare. Probably only a handful even exist.
Following a career that included stints as U.S. Secretary of War under 2 presidents, and a time as U.S. Minister to the United Kingdom under President Benjamin Harrison, Robert Todd Lincoln returned to private life as a lawyer in 1893. He served as general counsel to the Pullman Palace Car Company, and in 1897 was named president of the company following George Pullman's death.
The real majority of Robert's career was with the Pullman Company. It's really how he made his money. And so for us at Hildene to have a Pullman car built during his tenure as president really rounds out the story. It helps people understand who he was, and in some ways, even though it's far from Chicago, it explains Hildene.
The day that Hildene called me, they asked me if I was familiar with this car that was located on the Savannah River.
Bob Willits has been restoring railroad cars for decades. The task of restoring the Sunbeam would fall to him and his talented team of craftsmen.
When we do a restoration, we're looking to show the world how authentically we stay to traditional forms. Our replication of the original methods has been perfected. We've duplicated the shine of the beautifully done varnish, the meticulous handwork, the details that most people cannot afford in today's labor market. It's the authenticity that makes the workers proud to show it off.
The Sunbeam had been neglected for decades when it was discovered by the staff at Hildene, sitting under a pole barn beside the Savannah River in South Carolina. The once great Pullman car had fallen into serious disrepair.
You could tell that at one time it was truly magnificent. And one of the things that Hildene wanted to do was find a key representative car of the Pullman Palace era, something that would be typical of Robert Todd Lincoln's tenure as president of the Pullman Company.
We knew that we wanted to have a wooden car built during Robert's tenure as president.
Car was just absolutely outstanding as far as a time machine piece. It was just a visit back to the way that they used to do things in the Pullman factories. So we didn't want to ruin that. We tried to keep everything as authentic as possible, including the techniques of working on the car.
The craftsmen had their work cut out for them. They were restoring a wooden rail car originally built in 1888, using techniques and parts unknown to today's workers.
We have one builder's photograph of the main salon's interior. We have one builder's photograph of the exterior. And using those two key pieces of evidence, we were able to come back and get very close, nearly identical to the original.
They scoured the country, looking for original pieces of a Pullman Palace car. And when a particular piece eluded them, they recreated it by hand.
When we took the car apart, we did a few things like take the main mirror out of the main salon. And behind that mirror, a lot of the workers who worked on the car before, probably when it was being built in the 1880s, signed their name. Now, these guys must have worked with each other for years and years at the Pullman factories in Chicago. So we wanted to preserve that. Matter of fact, if anything, we added a few of our own names. Some of my employees wanted to squeeze their names in behind the mirror. So now the next people that pull this out like a time capsule will see all the names of all the people that have worked on the car.
The history behind this car is really neat. The craftsmen were artisans.
How's that?
I believe that they were actually machining some of the carvings and hand finishing them, whereas today we're having to actually hand carve these carvings.
Originally, we thought that the Sunbeam would only require a little bit of TLC, a little bit of sanding, a little bit of varnishing, a little bit of woodwork here and there. So it seemed that it would be quite affordably done. As it turned out, as we got into the project, we realized what a significant gem that we had, and it really called for a full-blown restoration with a lot more detail, a lot more restoration, a lot more woodwork, so much more staining, varnishing, making the leaded glass. Every single piece of leaded glass disappeared. But we had a local craftsman in the area who was able to replicate what we needed: 18 elliptical windows and several other full-size windows for the restroom and across the hall. Were all done basically by looking at builders' photographs, so that we could blow those up in a computer. We could get very, very close to the original.
What helped the most for me were there were some original windows that were still in the car. I got a piece of the broken glass out of some of the ones I restored and found the original glass company that made them, I guess, in the 1880s. They're still in business. I enjoyed going back, reconstructing windows that, like this one, that's missing. It's neat to go back and have a picture and to go back and duplicate it again since it was lost.
This is a piece of the original mahogany that was from the mirror that was greatly damaged. I hand painted the inlay through the area and got the color match so that it was exact, so it looks like it was part of the original piece.
The cars turned out to be superb, but it really took a lot of craftsmen, a lot of time, over a period of 4 years to put it all back together.
As important as the Sunbeam's restoration was to the staff at Hildene, their primary goal was to paint a portrait of the people who worked and traveled on the Sunbeam, both the affluent passengers and the African-American men who became known as Pullman porters.
In some ways, this car is emblematic of the Learjet of today. But maybe most fundamentally for us, it's also about the Pullman porters who worked on the car and sort of the mixed legacy of their relationship to the Pullman company. And really having people think about the fact that on the one hand, they were not necessarily treated as well as they should have been. On the other hand, it gave rise to the African-American middle class. And so there's a bundle of contradictions in there, which is very typical of history.
It's our responsibility in telling this story to present both sides, to put out the facts when we have conflicting information, to put it out there and to ask questions. It opens up dialogue, and that's what we're here for. That's part of what the education is not just to tell, but to engage people.
After 4 years of painstaking restoration, the Sunbeam was now ready to begin its final journey. A careful truck ride up the East Coast from its temporary home in South Carolina to its new permanent home at Hildene in Manchester, Vermont.
Car was so pristine and finished, we just didn't want anything bad to happen to it.
The car would have to be carefully lifted by cranes onto a flatbed truck for the trip to Hildene. Tensions were high as the crew lifted the Sunbeam. One false move could destroy years of hard work.
So a lot of care went into the wrapping of the car. Car was so pristine and finished, we just didn't want anything bad to happen to it.
As is frequently the case in life, the best laid plans have their bumps. In this case, there's a roundabout in Manchester that the car had to pass, sort of not around, but actually over. It's built so trucks can go over it. Everybody looked at it time after time and said, oh, it won't be a problem, it'll go over. Well, it was a problem. So it turns out, when it actually went over, it got hung up.
People didn't wait to be asked. People came in. They almost wordlessly knew what to do to get it fixed, to do it. And again, it was difficult for us, but it was a great community day.
One of the things that I thought was fascinating about the day was all the people that were there, how many of them were mesmerized. They just stood there and watched and watched and watched without moving. Well after what we had thought of as the event was long over.
Ultimately, the final journey of the Sunbeam succeeded through hard work, careful planning, and good fortune. The restored Pullman car arrived unscathed at its new home, where it stands as a testament to the man who led the Pullman Palace Car Company during a significant transformation, and whose vision changed the way Americans traveled and lived in the early 20th century.
There are many historical examples of interpretive displays that show only one facet of the story that they're trying to convey. The Hildene House is a magnificent house, and it tells an awful lot about the people that lived there. But this car has added an entirely new facet to it and a more well-rounded story. It connects so many different aspects of the time, the period, the family, the corporation that the man ruled over. This magnificent car has helped relay that story and make it make sense. It provides a context for all the other things that they're learning from this wonderful piece of property. This car really is the most magnificent part of the history of Robert Todd Lincoln.